Welcome to this new video where we do a very important topic today, and this is implementing of tracking events. Maybe you already think, oh yeah, this is definitely something that I would love to learn more, so stay tuned. We have a lot of things that we will tell you today, which may be helpful for you. I don't do this alone, so I have Sölvi with me, and because he is the perfect partner for that. So can you maybe give a quick introduction about yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm Sölvi, co-founder and CTO of Avo. I can maybe give a brief background of Avo. So yes. we fix data quality in product analytics. And this all started 10 years ago when me and my co-founder Steph were working at a mobile trivia game company here in Iceland. We had close to 100 million users. We were backed by Sequoia and Tencent. And it was the fastest growing app in the App Store. Later, that spot was taken by Flappy Bird, if you remember that one. So we really had the struggle of, we had to understand our users, what made them stay, what made them retain, are the things we are improving in the app, making the impact we thought it would, how can we improve retention, reduce churn, all the good stuff. And so we adopted the product analytics tools at the time. So Mixpanel first, and then Amplitude. And when Amplitude was still in beta, so this was really early. This was like 2013-15 era. Yeah. And instantly we felt the pain of getting reliable tracking across multiple platforms, and not even just across platforms, but just within a single iOS application, getting it reliable and consistent across the board there was difficult. And then that just multiplied when we added Android, we added web, because if you think about Spotify, there are 15, 20, 30 probably places to play a song. And that has to have the same tracking in a consistent manner. So what we did was building internal tooling to address this. Some schema registries that we kept up to date, code generators on top of those for the mobile platforms. But then also, more importantly, we changed the culture around this. So I was an engineer at the team, and I was one of the converted essentially in the culture change that happened. So before the culture shift, I was like, why are you asking me to implement tracking now? It will take 3 days. I just want to get this product out the door. Can you just get out of my way? And we changed the culture. So after the culture shift, I knocked on the data team's door and said hey, we are shipping this in a week. Can we sit down and talk about what the goals are, what metrics we need to measure the success? And then based on that, what events and properties we need to implement in the product analytics. And then the moment the thing went live, I was just in the real-time view of Mixpanel or Amplitude, just getting, and that became my feedback loop. Merging pull requests is fine, but seeing the impact your product is making on your user's life is what became my dopamine loop instead, and replaced just shipping code essentially. And this was led by Steph, this culture shift. So we implemented things like the purpose meeting. We have a script for that on our blog. Recommend you check that out if you're struggling with similar challenges, or if you're a developer that would like to care more about data and care more about your users and understand how your products are impacting your users. I highly recommend checking that out. So fast forward a couple of years, we were a team of 4 people, Steph and 2 more, and we hit the exact same issues immediately. So you would imagine this would only be a problem at 50, 100, 200 people plus size companies, but it's not. We were 4 people. We saved the data bug. We made a decision. We spent 2 weeks acting on that decision. We shipped it, and our conversion tanked because the data we were looking at was completely incorrect. So we went to the market and just hey, there must be an off-the-shelf solution to this now. This was 2017. Turned out there wasn't one. So we went out to talk to a bunch of data and product leaders out there, and 95 to 98% of them were miserable, just like us. And 2 to 5% had built something internally painfully over 3 years, just like we did. Right. And those were only the Twix, the Spotifys, the big ones that could afford it. But the rest was just I don't know. I thought it was only me, kind of problem. So at that moment, we decided to pivot into Avo. So that's how Avo came around. So early 2018, we started building and been helping companies like ourselves 10 years ago, and teams like ourselves 10 years ago, removing this bottleneck, because you should just be, focusing on delivering high quality user experiences. And you do that by having access to high quality data to make good decisions on what you should build next. So we are trying to remove that bottleneck.
Which is very important, because you mentioned a lot of good things, but I definitely want to pick out 2. So first of all, I thought it was just me. I have these conversations, I think, all the time, that people, when they tell me look, this is the problems what we have, we are a little bit ashamed of it because like we think we are the only company in the world that doesn't really get it managed. So I think the important first thing that we have to say today is like, you're definitely not alone. I would say like you have these problems in most of the setups to some different degrees. I mean, you can have it in a small degree, you can have it in a really serious degree that people even are starting to question their kind of setup and if they should do it at all. Because like, I mean, what you just said, it should be, this is the second part that I take away, is like, especially like for a software developer, I mean, you're working on this kind of feature for sometimes weeks, months, and then once it goes live, you want to have this feedback loop. You want, and you don't want to be the bottleneck that where you said, I mean, this is happening, where then in the end, like program or product is making the decisions, like we go without data. So we just release it because like we cannot really wait for this. You don't want to have this because like, I mean, it's ridiculous. Why do you release it in the first place if you don't want to measure it, to have this possibility? And this is what we want to enable. Before we do this, so we come to the enablement part, but before we do this, we at least like want to go a little bit into the pain again and to really list out what are the typical problems that are happening in the implementation part, because there are often problems happening in the implementation part, because we then want to use this to show the solutions for that. And so for that, we switch over to the wonderful whiteboard where we can sketch out all the things. And afterwards, we do a demo, so you can decide which is more exciting. So let's start out. I give you the floor to start, and I have some maybe to add as well. So from your experience, because I mean, you're in the perfect position. You, on the one hand, worked in software engineering, still work in software engineering, but on the other hand, of course, like with Avo, you see a lot of things. So what would you say, what are the usual problems that happen in the implementation process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So before we dive into that, like I just want to highlight like the analytics release workflow involves usually like 3 different roles.
Right.
So it's the product manager that's making a decision of like, hey, we should build this feature because X, Y, Z, and this is the impact it should be making. Then usually there is some sort of a data person, data product manager, data analyst. The role really varies between companies. And they are saying like, okay, what are the metrics you need to look at? And they try to walk through that with the PM probably, and then map that to what data they already have, and then identify the gaps and what needs to be implemented. That's usually when the developer should come in, but is probably not brought in already. Because that's crucial, because when you have like drafted what needs to be changed in the analytics and the data tracking, it's super important to loop in the developer as that third persona or third role in that cycle, because they need to give feedback on the implementation and tracking. So a really common example is like, hey, we wanted to track this event from the client side when the user clicks this button. We might not have this full context here. So like I could make a request to fetch the context, but then we need to show a loading spinner to the user just for, the analytics. That doesn't make any sense, right? So should we move it to the server side? And like this conversation needs to happen early to make sure we are all aligned on the specs for the tracking implementation. And that brings me to problem 1. And that is when the developer is brought into this, it's really common that there are no specs or really unclear specs. So the developer maybe gets a Jira ticket saying like, implement analytics for this feature. That's it. And then now you as a developer need to go and figure out like what analytics, because you just skip the entire planning process. And that creates this huge friction just to getting started. And that just makes you push this back, because as a developer, you're just looking for things to ship. You just want clear specs, get it done, ship it out, and be as efficient as possible. So usually that's problem number 1 that we see.
And then in the end, like you ended up with these, I mean, we have one explanation why, for example, then stuff goes out without the things, because like you have this really long conversation cycles. So there are sometimes, I mean, I saw Jira tickets that were, if you would print them out, you can already have a small book based on them, because like they're this long back and forth, because like was so much context missing that of course it needed this conversation. It's a question if it needed to be in a Jira ticket, maybe then let's say a direct conversation would be better. But this is a huge problem. And I also put in here that development is not involved too late, that it's often involved too late, because I see the same problem as well. So like people defining things and then they end just throwing it over the fence, sometimes with the application development, often after the application development. And if you have this and then this, then you basically cannot really release something properly.
Exactly. And you mentioned like a Jira ticket is a long conversation history. You can also just consider you're lucky to have a consolidated conversation history in a single place, because this could also be like Slack DMs going all over the place, even just like things written on a post-it and stick to a whiteboard somewhere. So yeah, that's problem number one. That brings us to problem number two. Like, okay, you got started, you got some specs somewhere and you started implementing them. But the feedback loop is very slow. The feedback loop meaning from you thinking you have implemented or instrumented the tracking code correctly to getting a confirmation that is the case. Usually how that goes is that you do some validation yourself as a developer, comparing it to the spec you got. Hopefully that is clear enough to reduce some of the room for error. But then you loop in maybe the data person to take a look at the actual data that you produced in the development or staging session, or they just go through the app themselves, or you have to wait for QA to come and check. And this could create a delay from like 1, 3, 7 days, depending on how your development process looks like. And then you already context switch to something totally different and maybe just the next new feature that you're excited about. So that also becomes annoying. So you have to go back, fix it. And hopefully it's only within those 3-7 day time period, because what could also happen is QA or validation isn't happening at all. It goes to production. Then the product manager asked 3 months later, or the CEO asked 3 months later, like, how did that launch go? And the data person goes in and says like, wait, didn't we implement it this way? And then now they ping the developer, and the developer, you have to go into the code base and figure out what you did there 3 months ago. And you just want to be building products for people.
Yeah.
So that's problem number 2. Slow feedback loop. And then maybe like the third problem that I see is essentially the pillar below everything here, because some of these that I've already mentioned can be solved with tooling. But the third problem is more of a culture problem, which is I, as a developer, I don't understand why I should care about this, why this is important. So that's the cultural challenge. And one part of that is that the developer isn't brought in soon enough, like you've already documented there. But also after the fact, when that data is released, the developer isn't being kept in the loop on how the things are actually performing, because you as a developer, you are making like tens or hundreds of micro decisions every day that impact the user experience. So if you don't have a feedback loop in place that can be driven by data, and data is a great way to create that feedback loop at scale, you aren't training your brain to become a better developer, to make better micro decisions. That's definitely problem number 3 that drives a bunch of other problems.
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
You're totally right. I mean, like, from my experience, and I mean, I do these, let's say, event data setup projects a lot. I think I did over, let's say, 50 of these projects. The ones who were most successful were the ones where development was involved from day one. First of all, either they already cared about, let's say, the product, and they wanted to have the data, or they started to care about because they were included from day one. And in the end, this made a significant difference in everything. So, for example, they knew that it's important what they put into, let's say, an event property, because they knew when we have the right stuff in there, I can analyze how the feature is used in this specific kind of way. So they had a closed loop on knowledge. And I always think like when you have a developer which, let's say, puts something where you think, okay, this is a little bit, I don't know, sloppy or not with enough care, it's often just they're missing context. People, when they have the right context, they do stuff properly. So I think this is very important.
And if I may throw one thought in there, because like looping in the developers earlier doesn't only improve the data quality, but it also improves the quality of the product, because essentially what you were trying to answer with data is what we, started with here. The purpose, the why we're doing this, is that coming to life. So having deep understanding of that improves the micro decisions the developer is making around the user experience when building the actual product. So that's why, for example, the first question in the purpose meeting is, what problem are we solving for the user, from the user's perspective? It improves the product overall, not only the data.
Very important point. And in the end, like, we don't do data for data's sake. In the end, like, data always have a means to improve product or business. And so if it doesn't, we actually don't need to look into even implementing something. I would like to add 2, let's say, I might call them smaller, but they're often really like something that makes it difficult, at least from my experience. So one is like you might have different people implementing event data. So you already said it, like you have different platforms. These are usually different kind of developers. If they're not all included, this is important that they're all included, they might start to make interpretation in their platform. And this might be slightly just automatic things. So the best example is like you have a backend developer who implements events, and you have let's say front-end developers. And then backend developers, they write it in Python. So for them, snake case is the most important, let's say, the natural thing. And so they start just to name things, even when you have a spec. They even start to implement things, how they implement things, how they have variables and so on. And the JavaScript developer does it differently because like they live in camel case world. And this doesn't sound serious, but in the analytics systems, these are two different events when you have one difference between both of them. And then you have a huge problem to handle this. This is definitely one problem that I saw and that we will show today how to solve this. And the second one is developers usually don't implement event data as a, let's say, normal job. This is often something that happens 4 times a year, 6 times a year, depending on the developer and depending on what you're working on. It's switching context for them. This makes it super hard for them to, on the one hand, develop application code, and then on the other hand, do this one task where they have to go into a totally different kind of context to implement some kind of tracking things. And so this is something where you can improve a lot if you make this as easy as possible. So for example, like unclear specification is hell for that, because it's always, they already have to do something which is definitely not on their list for everyday work. And then they don't even have clear specifications. So these are definitely two kind of, let's say, operational problems that I see pretty often. Okay, so let's have a look into what we can do to make it better. And I mean, you already gave a good backstory why you created Avo, and you put different kind of tools into Avo to basically to address all these things that we have mentioned here. So why don't we switch over to Avo and maybe really start on the high level to really introduce, okay, what Avo actually does on the, let's say, on the whole picture, on the big picture. And then we basically take more and more steps to address how we can solve all these things that we have mentioned here.
So this is essentially the analytics workflow I mentioned earlier. So here the PM is making a decision of making certain changes. And then what happens next is really depending on where you're at your maturity in this process. So that's why you can see the arrows is just like, they're just like in one soup. You might just go straight to looking at the data and say like, hey, it didn't get implemented. What's going on? But hopefully there is someone thinking about like, okay, based on that, what are our goals here? And based on that, what are the metrics we need? And then what are the event structures that we already have? What are the event structures we need to implement and get out? And then again here, there is some feedback loop happening. And this could be just like commenting in a Google Sheets or, commenting on a Jira ticket. And then someone goes and implements this thing. And as you already highlighted, like, for example, casing, like if you're working on 2 different platforms, the developer might just go and use their, casing of, that's the default casing for their environment. Yeah. Then hopefully someone is verifying the data they implemented is correct. And that's probably like comparing like all of these tools, the data destinations, the data collectors, they have some sort of like a, test mode where you can see the data flow through, or you could access the tables that you're sending the data into. And then comparing those data points to the Google Sheet or wherever you had the specs. And then the data.
By the way, just as a side note, this is the easy way of testing things. You might also end up that you go on a website and you basically trigger all the events by hand and you check them there if they're basically coming in. Because like sometimes, I mean, yes, if you run on these platforms, they make it easier. If you run on different kind of analytics setups and platforms, it might not be easy. So testing already might be a 1-hour job.
Yeah, and make it easier, but I would not say it make it easy because you're still just with your eyes. And also if there are more people sending in data in the same time, you just have to sift out what are your data points and then use your eyes to compare. And your eyes might miss typos really easily. Our brains are really good at autocorrect. And hopefully data ends up here. And that drives decisions to improve the user experience of your product because that's what we are here for. But as I said earlier, like these things are going all over the place. Things are being scaped. And it really depends on where you are as a company. So you could be in the Wild West here, which is basically not getting good data quality and you're not even having good development or delivery speed. You might say like, I don't care about the data, or we can't prioritize the data. We just need to get this product out tomorrow. Let's just think about the data later. That's when you're in this quadrant here. Then when you reach certain maturity and you really realize that data is important, you start treating data internally in your team as a product to empower the rest of your company, you usually go here. You say, like, we have to prioritize data quality, but that means you have to go through every step in the workflow I showed you earlier. And that, with no proper tooling or governance and workflow in place, that becomes extremely slow, frustrating process that usually drives everyone mad. But still you prioritize it because you understand the importance of good data quality. But that results in you will delay the product release by a day, by 3 days, by 7 days, maybe more, depending on the context. So what we're trying to do with Avo is unlocking this fourth quadrant. You shouldn't have to sacrifice delivery speed or data quality. So we believe that with the right tooling in place, you can save high quality data fast. So that is what we're trying to do here. And that essentially brings me to the same loop, but now facilitated essentially with Avo. So you mentioned that we have a bunch of tools to help. And that's like, we try to help along every step of the process essentially. So it starts with, you're planning the update that you're about to make. So you're thinking about, like, what are the metrics we need? What are the events we need? So that already is happening. There is some feedback loop happening. So you're getting the team to review, fellow data people, developers, product managers that want to use the data downstream. You're getting their feedback. If this is the plan, these are the events that we need. This will make us successful. So that feedback loop is happening. And then there is some implementation. We also have developer tools to help with the implementation and bring type safety into the implementation based on the specs that were defined in step 1 and 2. And we will demo that later. Then when things go into dev staging and eventually production, we have validation and observability tooling. For example, the inspector is a product that we have running in your production environment that observes all of the schemas that are going through and into your into the destinations you're using, and alerts if it spots violations based on the tracking plan that you defined. So then you merge those changes. You could publish them also, so Avo can, if Avo should be the single source of truth tracking plan, schema registry, whatever term you want to use for it, it has to be easily integratable with everything downstream. So Avo sits at the very upstream, even before you write the code that creates the data. So if you want that to be source of truth, it has to be tightly integrated, both with the tracking implementation itself, and that happens through implementation and observability, but also the tools that you are using downstream that depend on the tracking plan. So you might have something like, rudder stack tracking plans, snowplow, segment protocols for like ingestion time validation. And those depend on having up-to-date specs, up-to-date schemas, tracking plans. So you can make Avo just automatically keep them in sync. And then hopefully you get high quality data that you can learn from and make decisions on, and maybe train some models to create that recommendation algorithm you've been dreaming of. And then the cycle continues.
And it's because like the cycle continues. This is an important point. I think like the interesting thing what you showed on the slide before. This is basically like it's the same paradigm that DevOps has. And I mean, let's say DevOps is also like, why is DevOps? When you have good DevOps, what does it bring you? It brings you faster releases with better quality, which sounds a little bit crazy because like usually would say it's a trade-off, but it's not, because like DevOps definitely is proving that it's definitely not. And here you have the same thing. And one thing that is often missed out, and this is why I want to highlight is, you need this often releases also like on event data, because no one of us, not even myself who's doing this stuff for 20 years, I don't know any kind of question I want to answer with this stuff beforehand. I would say I know a good 70% that I want to go in if I have a specific kind of feature. But I can tell you, once I start to analyze with the stuff that I have, I come up with a new idea. I was like, oh, look, this kind of property would be really interesting to have. Yeah. Exactly. And when I have this kind of cycle, and this runs for 6 weeks or 7 weeks, it basically destroys an iterative approach on analyzing stuff from the start, because like if I know I have to wait for 7 weeks, so it basically doesn't make sense. If I have to wait for 2 or 3 days, or maybe like just a week, one sprint or so, it's totally fine. I can put it in, I can continue doing this. And this is so essential if you really work with this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So this is like just the state setting I wanted to make before we then dive into, because what I essentially want to do is then walking through steps 1, 2, 3 in demo. I make step 1 and 2 brief because I know the primary audience here is developers, so you probably care most about the implementing analytics part. But just quickly run through how this might help. We'll probably have another video diving into more details of that, and then we can go in here. So let me just switch over to Avo real quick. So now we are in Avo. Before we dive in, I just want to show you the rooms real quick. So when I open Avo the first time, it's like when you're showing your apartment, you just want to show people where the bathroom is. Otherwise, you feel uncomfortable being there. So when I open Avo, the first thing I see are the open branches. So this term might sound familiar to you as a developer, and it should, because here we are adopting a concept known to developers for decades, probably soon, at least, where you can brand your code. And just like your code, you should be able to brand your tracking plan, because you can have, just like in code, you can have multiple parallel changes happening simultaneously in a single team, or what about like a big company? Definitely. So what we built into Avo is essentially its own branding mechanism. So it's not based on Git or anything like that, but it has the same concepts. What we did though was boiling it down to something slightly more simple, because Avo should work as a bridge between PMs, data people, and developers. So not everyone might have, the developer know-how of Git. So we are trying to abstract the concepts to be that bridge between these people, speak language that all of them speak. But essentially, when you make changes in your tracking plan in Avo, you create a brand, and then you're in total isolation. You can do whatever you want. You can play around. You can, you're not going to make any mess. And then when you want to merge the brands, you get that review from a peer or a data person that wants to review everything, or depending on how your process looks like. Then you merge it in. Then it goes into the main brands, and the main brands should essentially represent what is currently being tracked. So when a data analyst asks, what's the event for when people do XYZ, they can just go into Avo, they can search and find that particular event. And that brings me to the tracking plan tab. So this is usually replacing a spreadsheet or Confluence table, or maybe nothing if you didn't have any sort of tracking plan documentation in place before you start using Avo. But here you can just see a list of all of your events. You can see if they're being sent correctly or not. Looks like we are having some problems here according to the inspector. And I can segment, do I want to look at it, categorized. And you can also look at that tracking plan from different lenses. So you can look at it from properties first or metrics first. But these things are all interconnected. So a single property can be attached to multiple events in Avo. So this is something we built, like this shared namespace concept, to improve consistency across your tracking plan. You shouldn't have to define every property type for every event you want to use it on. Then we have the
really look forward to this.
Yes,
I'm a big fan of that. Yeah,
exactly. And we also have things like property bundles to make your life easier. I might touch a little bit on that slightly in the moment. Then we have the inspector. It shows you any issues you might have in your production environment. It looks like based on these filters, we are in good shape. What I could do here, for example, if I am an iOS developer, for example, I could go in here and say hey, I want to be notified of all iOS onboarding event issues. And then I can just connect that to my Slack channel and get alerted whenever something pops up. So this is something we recommend, for you as a team to own your events, own the quality of your events. So check that out. We're not going to spend more time on this in this session. Then we have publishing. So as I mentioned before, Avo is at the very source before you even start implementing the data. So it's important that it syncs with the toolchain that you have downstream. So here, for example, we have a few integrations already set up. We could add more. Because this is a developer session, I'm going to highlight the webhook option. If you want to just receive a JSON schema whenever your tracking plan is changed in Avo, you can set up a webhook to do exactly that. And from there, you can do whatever you want. Are you building out tables in your warehouse? Are you building your in-house ingesting-time validation? Are you just publishing static documentation of it to whomever? The sky is your limit. Then we have CodeGen, which I'm going to spend some time on demoing in a moment. So I'm not going to talk more about that right now. And then we have the sources and destinations. So this might, if you have seen a CDP, customer data platforms, they all have a screen like this, like Segment, Stack, Snowplow, and Particle, all of them. They have a map from sources to destinations. And what they do is receiving the data from these sources and piping the data into these destinations. Avo does not do that. So I just want to make that really clear. However, we have this configuration here from a documentation perspective. So what this means is you can't have a tracking plan and I wouldn't call it a tracking plan if it doesn't contain from where is this data being sent and where does it end up. So what we're doing here is just like you map out all of the data, all of the places where you're creating data, and you're mapping out all of the places that end up receiving your data. Also, if you're using something like a CDP, you might only have the CDP as a destination in Avo, and then you configure a bunch of destinations that the CDP sends the data to. So like that's like another layer of destinations. So I wanted just to call that out, and it's an important thing to, and it's like probably the most commonly asked question. So Avo does not process or track or ingest or in any way touch the actual data you're collecting. We only work at the schema level. So for example, in CodeGen, which I'm going to demo soon, which is the type-safe wrapper around your destinations, it only sits in front and it wraps your SDKs. So you still have the SDK you're already using to send the data. So being Mixpanel or RedStack or Google Tag Manager, data layer, those will continue to be in your client, receiving data and sending it to their servers. And so I was only, in the front and not touching any of the actual customer data.
Yeah, more like a metadata platform.
Exactly. Yes. So I think I have showed you all of the rules right now. So now what I'm going to do is put on my data hat.
Okay.
Let's say I'm a data product manager. And I just talked to the product manager on my team, and they were saying like, yeah, we're going to add a newsletter subscription checkbox to the sign-up flow. And I say, great. We might want to understand if people are subscribing to the newsletter so we can understand like, if it's in the right place and stuff like that. So to do that, we are going to track an event when people toggle that checkbox. So let's go ahead and just start typing out. Let's call it newsletter subscribed. So here you can already see.
That's a good one.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. So here we have Avo helping us out. So because this is not the casing all of our event names are in. So it's saying like, hey, you should try this one here to keep your casing consistent. And consistency in data is really important. You probably know this, Timo, to make the data consumption much easier.
Yeah, because like to give just a short context, you might have specific kind of ruling, specific kind of processes downstream in the data pipelines that rely on specific kind of patterns. So even when you think it might not be important, it can be important. I think this is a general data rule. So even when you think there might be something relying on that to be like this.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you might, break, warehouse table naming conventions or whatever.
Or better see it like this. I always give this example. You might break this one dashboard that your CEO is currently presenting to your investors if you're a startup, or you can see the other scenarios.
So let's go with this one. It sounds safer. And now, because I'm making a change, Avo is prompting me to go to a brand so I can get feedback and work with this in isolation and not block anyone out on this change. So let's just create onboarding newsletter checkbox, really specific brand's name right here. So now this brings us into a brand. So everything looks exactly the same, except you can see we are on brands here, and I can switch between those here. And I can see this particular event has been modified on these brands. So it has been brought to the workbench of the tracking plan. Let's say it should only be sent from the web application for now. And we can here say like sent when the user toggles the newsletter subscription input box on the onboarding screen. And we can even take it further, and we could here add screenshot of that design or feature if it's already implemented. And we can even, like if we have it on multiple sources, we can, upload the screenshot for each source to just make it super explicit where this event is sent. And
just as a side note, if you are a developer and you want to make a really, really great job, if you do this, it doesn't really take a lot of time, but I can tell you, in the future, it saves so many headaches from so many people, because the question comes naturally, even for someone who already implemented this, actually, where is this kind of stuff triggered? And especially like when you are developing, you are implementing, you at the point when you implement, you know perfectly where this stuff is happening. So any context that you can give here will help future generations in your company to do better work. So
exactly, that's a great highlight. So yeah, so you could upload screenshots, you can add description, and you can also, if you have some questions or something, or you're making some decision, you can also here now throw in a comment. And everything, all the changes I'm making, all the comments I make will live with this event forever in the tracking plan. So, 3 years later,
Full
someone
history.
someone searches for this event and they will be able to, see the full audit of who made what change when, and hopefully they're leaving also some paper trails of comments and reasoning for those changes. So we also want to track some metadata with this event. So let's add some property. For example, if we would like to A/B test this, we could add the experiments bundle. So that's something we've defined in this particular tracking plan, because in our team, we A/B test. And when we A/B test, we need these 6 properties to evaluate the A/B test. So here we can just, with a click of a button, pull all of those in. Just to keep the implementation demo simpler, I'm not going to demo and make you watch me implement 6 different properties, because that's repetitive and boring. And let's just add one event to begin with, no one property to begin with. So here we have product type. So let's say, you could pick what kind of product category or product type your newsletter is for or something. We're working in hypotheticals here. Then I can categorize, I can add tags. Common use case here is, for example, like, this is related to onboarding. So we might want to add it to the onboarding category. And this is owned by the growth team. So now the growth team can, filter down and see all of the events there on their own.
And we saw the benefit of the categories already, like when you were setting up the alerts, because like there it's, for example, really.
Exactly. Yes, definitely. So it allows you to slice and dice a tracking plan in bunch of different places. So now I got the prototype. One thing to note here, when I add in the web source, I toggle the include in CodeGen. Before I do that, I want to untoggle that and show you, like, when you're not using CodeGen, because CodeGen is this type-safe SDK or wrapper around your destinations or SDKs, but it's in no way required. So you can use Avo totally fine without it. It's just like yet another tool to help with a specific step of the workflow we covered earlier. So if you're not using CodeGen, we will show you a pseudocode. So here we can see we added prototype, we added platform. So what we say is, like, it looks like you're sending this data to these 4 destinations because we know that has been configured to be set there. So you want to implement some sort of a track method with the newsletter subscribe as a string for the event name, and then you want to provide these parameters, and these should be the allowed values. This is just some pseudocode to get you started. This does not look, your actual tracking code will not look like this, but this is just like, to help you get an idea for it. We will though made some experiments with, like, using OpenAI to convert this to more specific SDKs and stuff like that. We might roll out something like that soon.
Okay.
Let's see. In the meantime, you can do it yourself by using ChatGPT.
The good thing is, like, at least like most of the platform are pretty consistent how they do things. So at least like the track event, at least not the tag manager has a different one, but Mixpanel and Rudderstack both support the track events. So
exactly, yeah. But then there tend to be these slight nuances.
Yes, of course. Yes. For the fun part, they basically make it slightly different.
Yeah. So and getting those right is super important. So that's why we are aware of, like, let's make it abstract, then you just take care of that. And now let's say we are done with this change. Now I just want to take a look at all the changes I just made. So we added one event to the onboarding category and we created the newsletter subscribe event. Here we could loop in, like, hey, Timo and let's say Sang, could you look at this brand real quick and add your thoughts? Sorry, Timo, I didn't invite you to that party, so I can't mention you. But now you will get an email if you would be a member of this workspace. And you will be able to come in here. You could add comments, say like, hey, should we maybe add this particular property as well, or use that XYZ other thing? Or you could bring in a developer like myself, and I could say like, wait, we might not have prototype at that moment, and blah, blah, blah. So that conversation is happening here. And once we are all happy, we can proceed to the implementation.
And just as a part, this happens all the time. This is like, of course, like, you might think this would be a really useful property, but in the end it comes down, okay, what actually can be surfaced, what is actually available. So it might need a lot of work. So I had projects where, let's say, the implementation part took so long when we asked for it, was like, yeah, actually we didn't have the data available. You just had to change the APIs to make the data available. Where I thought this would be really useful to discuss it in the first place, because then we would make maybe a version 1 and then a version 2 and so on.
Exactly. Or move, like, send the event from the server instead, where we have all of the context. Maybe that's just even better, because then you won't get ad blockers in the way and stuff like that. So let's proceed to implementation. So when we can already see here at the bottom of the review screen, like, there is implementation that is required. So we come in here and we can see one source needs to be changed, the web source, and one event on that source should be changed. So we can dig into that and check that out. So now let's say if I am the data person and the product person who is, like, taking lead of creating these brands, or maybe it was a developer. If you're in like the happy place of analytics where anyone can go and create specs and suggestions to the tracking plan, you can share a link to this if the person is a member of the workspace. Create a tier ticket, linear ticket, whatever you're using for the analytics implementation itself. You could also create a public share link. So that way anyone can take a look at these particular specs or changes that need to happen. Now I come in as a developer, so I'm going to push on my developer. So I just opened this. I just saw the ticket for implementing the tracking for the feature I'm working on. And now I spot like, okay, this is a pseudocode, but I actually want to try out CodeGen. So then I toggle this, and then you can see that the code snippet here and here changed. So now suddenly we have a totally different interface. We don't have to call each individual destination on its own, and we essentially don't have to type anything out, because typing things out can lead to typos. And that is, a big reason for data bugs in the world. So here I can just get this method to implement my tracking changes in a type-safe way. And to get started, I just use the Avo CLI and pull the updated Avo CodeGen based on the changes made on this particular branch.
I just want to highlight, this is a really nice thing. So I just talked about, like, this is stuff that you might not do every day. And so for me, everything that I don't do every day, I love when people are helping me to remember the things, because like I know myself, I have to look up again how I use the CLI to pull basically the changes. So this is extremely helpful to just have it with a click.
Exactly. So yeah, what we're trying to do here is just make the life of the developer as easy as possible, because that also makes the life of everyone else involved in the process easier. And it's easier to get developers to act on this. And, Avo has changed in many companies, tracking implementation from being this chore or this burden or this boring task to being this, fun, quick win, dopamine shot. So we love to see when that happens. Now I am just going to shift to the implementation of this. Then I might need to share my entire screen. Now you can see this fancy demo workspace I have going here. So this is the product I'm working on. I am a developer at Hacker News, and I'm working on new sign-up form. As you know or may know, the sign-up form for Hacker News isn't pretty. So we're trying to fix that. This is running locally, and here is the code base I have for it. So this is a very simple React TypeScript application. It just has the render method and whatever, and just, it's spitting out this thing. And because we're running Avo in development, and we are using CodeGen for most of the events we're tracking here, we have the debugger here. So I just want to point that out already. So the debugger gives us like this visual feedback. So as I am now like typing out these things, I can see which events are being triggered, and I can dig into this and see literally which values are being set. So this is all just happening locally, and the CodeGen is just spinning this up for us.
First takeaway, so if you're a developer, and this is also like very helpful for all the other people who are later testing things. So if it's, let's say, so for web, I think you also have it for mobile as well. So
yes.
Yeah, so that for all the front ends, so this is something where you can already, if you add this can already help a lot.
Yeah, so this is not only helpful for me as a developer, just to verify that the values I'm sending are the right values, but what you're also seeing is developers have made set up ways to enable this in developer staging builds, internal builds at the company. So as you mentioned, we have this also for iOS and Android and React Native. And so we have seen people add this to the internal shake menu. So now product people and data people who are actually consuming the data consumers of the company, they don't have to, go to you as a developer or look at the tracking plan, ask what's the event for blah, blah, blah. They can just shake their phone, enable the Avo debugger, walk through the app, trigger the events themselves, and just take a look at what was being said. Yeah, definitely. And that was unexpected to us, because here we were just focused on developer experience, and then suddenly this other use case came. We learned about that. Obvious. Awesome. Now we have this running, and we are just ready to make this tracking change. So I have already initialized Avo CodeGen in this project, so I'm not going to bore you with those details, but that should, in any case, be a quick process. Yeah, I think we just don't have to wait for anything. So let's just go back to Avo and copy this CLI command, and let's run it. So now you can see it's running Avo code from the onboarding newsletter chat box branch for the web source. So that's all there is. And I run this, And you might have noticed I have this other file here, avo.ts, next to my app.ts. This is the CodeGen. So CodeGen is not like a dependency or an SDK. It's essentially just a utility file for your analytics that is generated by the Avo CLI. So it just lives in your code base. It lives next to your other code. So you should keep it in a place where you would keep the, analytics utility files. And that means that every change that you make to the Avo CodeGen goes through, CodeGen's, code reviews and deployment process you already have. So Avo CodeGen does not have any direct access to your production environment. So there's no hard dependency on Avo there. Just wanted to make that clear because it's
it's open, it's right, and it's open, it's transparent, and it's extendable. I mean, it's like that you can handle stuff in there. So it's like,
so like we recommend you should never make changes directly to this file, but you can definitely
send it. I had the immediate idea after I just said it like as well.
And if you have any feedback, please we try to act fast on all of this stuff and make it right. But let's take an example. So now we just generated this code, and what that should have done is adding this method here because that didn't exist before. So we can just go ahead here and search for it. So here you can see we now have a defined interface for the methods, and then we have the method defined here. Also some documentation directly from the tracking plan. So this is all interconnected. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but high level, you can see that we are striving to make the outputs of the CodeGen as human readable as possible. So we are not like throwing like some minimized JavaScript to your face. We try to make it as readable as possible. So you can always just like take a look under the hood and see exactly what's happening, because we believe that's super important for you as a developer to understand the tools you're using and that you can reveal the complexity and dig into the details if you want to. So what we do here is we do some runtime validation for the things you can't use the compiler, like min and max integer validations as an example. Then we communicate to the Avo UI and the Avo inspector, if you're using the inspector, that this event is being set and if it's being set correctly or not. And then we essentially just pass the data into our destinations. So this is happening here, and this is using the destination interface. And the destination interface is a concept we created, so I'm going to cover it here. So when I initialize Avo, I provide an interface for every single destination that we had configured. As you might have remembered, we were sending this particular event to these 4 destinations. So we got 4 destinations configured here. And the destination interface is basically just, for example, in TypeScript, it's just like an object with callbacks. So here you're basically teaching Avo how to use your destination. So if you want to lock event, or when Avo wants to lock an event, so when you trigger the newsletter subscribing method, we have said like we want to lock an event. We could also, be updating user properties or doing any of the other common methods of the analytics SDKs. So basically there's a one-to-one mapping between the actions that they define in the event and the callbacks of the destination interface. So here basically you receive the event name, you receive the event properties, and now it's your job as a developer. One time when you initialize Avo for this project for the first time, you teach Avo how to lock the event into the tool. So for example, Mixpanel is mixpanel.track. Rudderstack is the same. If you're using Google Tag Manager, data layer.push. And then we have, alternatives. Like if you're using a custom API and you just want to use the, already existing wrapper you have for that, you can go ahead. Like there's no limitation to what you do here. So here we trust you to take the reliable data Avo helped you create and get it out of the client and into your destination, or out of the server if you're in a server-side destination.
But the good thing is like it doesn't really block you if you want to do things differently, and so then...
Yes, and this is essentially, because you mentioned like CodeGen is extensible, so this is definitely a way to extend it. So
this
here you could... so here you can make changes or, do something, that is specific to your use case. And another thing that is good about this approach is that you are the owner of the SDK. You take care of initializing it, so being Mixpanel or Stack or whatever. So this setup works side by side by existing implementation for those SDKs. So, and this is important. When you adopt CodeGen, we don't recommend you go and rewrite your entire tracking with CodeGen. That is just dangerous, and we don't recommend, and time consuming. And we recommend starting with one feature release. Just try out CodeGen for, the next event you implement or the next event you update, and see how it feels like. I will just sit next to whatever you have already, so you don't have to make any change to that. And then if you like it, you can gradually adopt it and increase the adoption as you add more events or update existing. So wanted to make sure you can probably put like a highlight note on that. Now I have covered a bit, how this all works. One other thing to mention, CodeGen is available in like 12, I think, different programming languages, and we are always having the radar for what we should add on, for what we should add next. So you can go to our docs to see a list of all of the currently supported languages. If you don't see yours, please reach out and let us know, because we are keeping count of those requests and making sure we are prioritizing based on what our users need. So now when I want to go ahead and just implement this particular event, we can already see we got 2 events implemented here. So we can just follow that same pattern essentially. So what we do is just using the Avo module that is here, and we have already imported that here. And when we type out Avo dot, we already got some auto-completion going. So it was something like newsletter or something.
Fun part.
Now we don't even have to remember the name of the event. We don't have to type it out as a string, which could contain a typo and destroy all of our metrics. So now I just hit tab and I'm good to go. And now the editor is already saying like, hey, there should be something more here. And now because we have this inline documentation in the CodeGen here, now we are under the hood behind the scenes. We are seeing that directly here in our, because I switched tabs, we were seeing that right here in line. So now the auto completion continues. We got product type. Okay, let's have it. The AI wants me to say it's free. Let's try that.
Copilot's pretty eager.
Yeah. Yeah. Just give it away for free. So now we can see, because this is a TypeScript project, TypeScript is not happy. We already saw the red underline here. So this is a type safety I was talking about. So now we just have type safe implementation of this thing here. It was something
because
about...
just giving back, we didn't show it in detail. What product type is set up in Avo is it basically has an enum of possible values. So and free is not part of the setup. As we can see, we can just have mark, umbrella, and hoodie.
So we could say it should be mark. Let's go for that. And just type out mark. But I was still not happy because details matter in this thing. And this is not a capital M like it was documented here. So we could go for mark, and then everyone should be happy, sweet. Or we could use the enum that we generated as well. We try to utilize the type system of the language we are working with as extensively as you possibly can. So for example, we have enums in all of the languages that have that concept. So now this is green, which is perfect. And now we should be able to go into the product and see newsletter subscribe. So this was just this hot reloaded and sent the event. So now we can see Mac and the platform. This is green. So now I just got that visual confirmation. If I would be doing something that the compiler can't enforce, like as I mentioned earlier, like min or max values of a float or an integer, we would be delivering that feedback here. So the debugger would be screaming red if something was going incorrectly. But as we mentioned in the intro section where we're talking about the problems, the second problem I mentioned was feedback loop, the speed of the feedback loop. And you can't make it faster than this. This is like milliseconds. So that is essentially the magic, the superpower of the CodeGen, I would say.
Because imagine the alternative to this would now you would release it with mark routing in small letters. You already prepared a report on the data side, which is basically using a filter, which expect the thing that is defined. And they are wondering, so everything is released, you put it on staging. So let's say even it's an optimal scenario. They do the first test and they say oh, look, the dashboard is not populating. Where's the problem? They spend half a day to figure out where's the problem until they recognize, oh, look, oh my God, we wrote mark not with a capital letter. This is and this feedback loop then takes 2 or 3 days instead of basically here 2 or 3 seconds. So this is
2 or 3 milliseconds, I would say.
Right.
So this is CodeGen. And now when we go back to the Avo UI, we can go back to the changes we just made and give it a quick refresh. Then we should be able to see implementation status here turn green. So now Avo has confirmed, we saw this being set correctly 2 minutes ago in production, no in development. This helps not just me as a developer. So now this is basically my checkbox. Hey, I've already implemented this next code. Let's go to the next one. But this also communicates to the person who is maybe the PM or data person who is taking the lead of the implementation across multiple platforms. They can now see okay, web is done, maybe iOS or Android are not. I might need to ping those or say hey, let's do that later and get this merged. So that is the feedback loop we are creating here.
It's really the good thing is it's a constant feedback loop. So as I said, if you really want to deliver often and fast, so this is something it doesn't really take a lot of time. So and also it takes away this back and forth. So
exactly.
Already implemented. Yes, no. and so on. So it's like, yeah.
Because this is developer demo, I'm wondering if we should take like one step further here and just to show off
Let's do that.
The power of CodeGen. So there are two features that I wanted to demonstrate in the tracking plan and how it works with CodeGen. The first one I want to talk about is what we call name mapping. So when I go into this prototype here, I can go ahead and add something we call name mapping. It's right here. The name mapping allows us to send the property with different names depending on where it's being sent. So you might know this problem of like custom dimensions in GA. Thankfully, that's going away for good, I hope.
No, they're still there, but
yeah, exactly. Or you might have like a ad conversion platform that only understands 5 different event or property names. You might want to still get the rich name, descriptive name into your product analytics tool, for example, but then just map it last minute before it goes into those alerts. So here we can go ahead and let's say this is I don't know, just type, and that should be sent to let's say the Google Tag Manager. And so what happens now is that there are some changes here already. And because we are already implementing this, we can just go ahead and run Avo pool again. What will now happen is that CodeGen. So without CodeGen, the developer would have to be really careful about making sure this is happening. They would have to make sure they are mapping the name at the right time for the right destination. But what CodeGen does, it just takes us back here and it knows how to apply it. So what happened right here is that for Google Tag Manager now we have a different set of properties you're passing in. So this is all happening automatically. You don't have to think about it. So, the Google Tag Manager properties now have the type key, while the rest has the product type key. So that is
a really nice assistant, because this is super painful, and this is the stuff that usually goes wrong, because like this is one exception that break everything, but you cannot change it because like these are different systems, so it's not in your hands, but you still have to take care of it.
So let's remove this one. The other thing I wanted to highlight is what we call pinned properties. So in some examples, you might have properties on your events that should always on that particular event have the same value. So then instead of asking the developer or user developer having to provide the value every time when you send the event, you can just pin the value. So here you can go ahead and say like, yeah, these are the allowed values. In this particular case, we are only promoting the Merck newsletter. I don't know, I'm interested, send me up for the Merck newsletter. So now it's pinned to Merck. And now if we do the same dance again, and we just add the CodeGen really quick, we will see that the interface of the CodeGen will change. So instead of asking for a product type, it will just provide the Merck pinned value on its own. So we don't have to think about it. So that is another example of how Avo is making here. So now you can see there's no properties being required, but still even properties are being set with the product type value. So this is how, Avo is not only, making our life as developers easier, but also improving data quality and just removing the room for possible error.
Removing the post-its from your display where you always put it like this. Oh, I shouldn't forget to do X, Y, that. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Or the, Jira ticket bug reports that you should fix.
Right. No, I think this is extremely helpful. I don't know. Do you have something else that we should share? If not, I would say we can wrap it up.
Yeah, these 2 things came to mind, so I want to cover those. I'm probably forgetting a bunch of things. So if you have any questions after watching this thing, please just reach out. We are always available in the Intercom bubble here. There's always someone technical there ready to answer your questions.
Right.
We have like
up to the right. So
yes, exactly. There I am. So, or just reach out to support@avo.sh or avo.app. And we will help you out.
Right.
Yeah.
Because to wrap it up, and I think this is a starter, and I think the important thing for us is first of all, if you are a developer watching it, you are the essential part of a data setup. And even when you don't think you are an essential part, you are an essential part. You are basically you are the one guarantee to improve data quality, let's say from the start. And I can tell you everyone who's working later on a data setup will thank you for ages. And then maybe they buy you a drink when you have your Christmas party, because they don't have to write these weird case statements to catch out all the different things that are happening before. And so try to be involved as early as possible. And so CodeGen gives you the tool to make then your life a lot easier, and also to make the process for you a lot smoother, not rethinking all the time, okay, where do I test it? How do I get the changes? And so on. So if you are a product person or data person watching this is something, take this video, go to your development team, show to them, motivate them to watch it, because like this can make their life significantly easier. And this can, in the end, result in something as you as, let's say, as a data and product person, is like to get this delivery time of, let's say, new, different kind of event data improved significantly. And I can tell you this changes the game. You call it out, like it's a cultural change, but it's an important one. So in the end, build better products, better user experiences.
And again, none of this is required. So also if you're a developer, you're like, yeah, this doesn't work for my use case or whatever. If that's the case, I would love to talk to you so we can figure out why. But either way, you can get a lot of value just from, having the specs more clear by using the tracking plan collaboration. And having like observability with inspector, like you can have all of those things without the CodeGen. And that's, for example, why we also recommend, like, if you're planning on using CodeGen, adopt it gradually, perhaps also add the inspector to observe all of the existing things you have, just to have some coverage on those or some observability on those, and then gradually adopt from there.
Yeah, it's not black and white. It's really like you can just try it out step by step and start to introduce it. I think this is super valuable. Thank you so much. That was an excellent demonstration of where it really helps and it really makes sense to understand all the different kind of parts. So thank you. And for everyone else, so we also have some other videos out there, so you can definitely check them out.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time, Timo. Thank you for taking the time to watch whoever is working. Hopefully
thank you as well. Yeah, I think so. Pretty useful. Thanks.
See you. Bye-bye.